Hello, I'm Mariette DiCristina, the Dean of Boston University College of Communication. I'm also an alum of COM and the parent of a recent BU grad. Welcome to this afternoon's COMTalks event called Off the Beaten Path, Less Traditional COM Careers. This event is being recorded and will be available later to event registrants. Many of us start college with one plan, for instance, to go work at a big agency or an entertainment company or maybe a media outlet. Then, after the years go and you're feeling burnt out or facing a tough job market or looking to find your purpose, you might end up asking yourself, where else can I use my communications degree? Where else can it take me? Well, you're in luck because today's panelists are going to explore just that. They'll share how they leverage their communication skills in other industries beyond communication itself. When you have questions, please put them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, not in the chat. And please feel free to put those questions in at any time. And I promise there'll be plenty of time later to discuss them in this event. Now it's my genuine pleasure to introduce today's speakers. First, let's say hello to Alison Inouye, who is a graduate of COM and Questrom in 2011 and digital producer at Netflix. Alison has spent the last 11 years in creative marketing production for entertainment brands in film, television, streaming, and consumer products. Currently, she produces the FYC, pardon my language, FYC campaigns for Netflix, aiming to help the distributor reach industry awards voters through targeted and compelling creative on digital platforms. Prior to Netflix, a majority of her career was in service to the print and digital advertising campaigns for Disney, Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilm, and 20th Century. And she's also collaborated with studios such as Sony, Universal, and WB. Welcome to you, Alison. It's awesome to have you here. Now let's say hello to TJ Keitt, who's a COM grad in 03 and 05, and today Vice President Market Research at SAP. TJ heads up the user experience market research function within SAP's design organizations. Prior to holding that role, TJ led a customer experience strategy team for SAP. And before joining the SAP company, TJ spent over 15 years in professional services, first working in new product development consulting before moving on to lead research, advisory, and consulting efforts in a range of software market and B2B customer experience practice areas. It's great to see you again, TJ. Dr. Colin Rose is the founder and CEO of Perennial Education Consulting, where he supports leaders to operationalize systemic improvements for excellence and equity. He currently supports more than 25 school districts around the Commonwealth, as well as leaders at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Prior to his consulting work, Colin was assistant superintendent at the Boston Public Schools. Colin began his career as a teacher, fostering some of the highest student growth scores in Massachusetts. And after studying at CGS, COM, and Wheelock, he earned his doctorate in leadership in urban schools at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. It's awesome to have you here, Colin. Thanks for joining. Now let's say hello to Kayla Warren. After receiving her bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Georgia, Kayla earned her master's in health communication from Boston University in 2018. While at BU, Kayla completed a health communication internship with the National Cancer Center in Rockville, Maryland, which launched her career in government health. For the Office on Women's Health, she's worked as a communications associate on user experience for the womenshealth.gov and girlshealth.gov websites. After enrolling in a UX boot camp, she leveraged her background in communications and government to land her first role as a UX designer working on the cdc.gov website. It's awesome to have you here. Now let's welcome our moderator, Heather Fink, Director of Career Services at the Boston University College of Communication. Heather spent 10 years of experience as manager, employer relations professional, advisor, and teacher at 7 private and public university career centers. In her role as the Director of Career Services, she manages employer and alumni relations, as well as managing all of our career services initiatives. Her goal is to infuse equity and inclusion into all of COM's career programming, events, and services. And now I'm really pleased to turn the mic over to Heather. Thanks all so much to you for joining.
Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to see everyone in the chat and to see we have about 50 people that are here today. I'm really excited. Thank you all for agreeing to be panelists. I'm going to kick off today's talk with the first question, and it'll go to Alison first, and I'll move it to TJ, Colin, and Kayla after that. So why don't we start off by you telling us a little bit about what degree that you originally pursued at BU. I know many will be curious if you knew what you wanted to do before you entered BU. And if so, has that changed? And did you find yourself in a different field? So Alison, let's start with you.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me. COM is actually my second school at Boston University. So I entered as a freshman in the School of Management, or what's currently known as Questrom. And I was really focused on a career in marketing for my undergrad. And I was, really curious about branding, product launches, and finding consumers through really creative tactics. And I kind of thought that's what I was going to explore through my time at BU. But my view of potential career opportunities really expanded once I had my first internship after freshman year, because I was incredibly fortunate to work at Disney ABC Television in their communications department. I was an intern helping out with mostly their PR team. And prior to that, I had never really considered PR communications just because I didn't have too much visibility or a whole lot of awareness of those types of roles, but I ended up loving it. And I always knew I loved TV, even earlier than I knew I was passionate about films. So that internship was just a thrill in taking me behind the scenes of what it takes to promote a show and its talents. And I was working press events, photo shoots, writing like log lines and synopses of episodes, and doing a lot of the administrative tasks that go along with the communications department. And then because I had realized entering college that I came in with a lot of AP credits, I was actually able to fit in a second degree into my program. So I could either graduate early with all the AP credits, or I could take on the second degree. So that's when I officially entered the collaborative degree program within COM. And that's when I tacked on that PR concentration. I thought having kind of both those interests at the same time would help kind of broaden my possibilities too. Once I entered the working force. So it allowed me to maintain both those internships. And I thought because all of my subsequent internships kind of stayed within the realm of the entertainment industry, that career path was being a little bit more nurtured. And so I did envision continuing along the entertainment publicity route, but ultimately ended up shifting quite a bit just because of, a tough job market following graduation, and also just a lot of other factors in being in the workforce and realizing how I can kind of transfer my skill set to other fields.
Awesome, thank you. TJ, would you like to go next?
Sure. So I entered BU as a print journalism major. I had been a editor of my high school newspaper, contributor to literary magazine at my high school. I was been writing for years, and that's why I assumed I was going to wind up in a newspaper, maybe the New York Times, something like that. And then I guess after being at COM for about a year, I got interested in crisis communication, and so I switched to PR. And then I graduated, and I didn't know that I wanted to do any of that. So I went to grad school, and in grad school, I studied applied communication research, which I think they call marketing research now. And when I finished that degree, I didn't really know where to go, so I wound up at a new product development consultancy. There was a history of people coming out of BU going to that company that I started out at. So I ended up there, and every move since then has been more or less just kind of serendipitous and opportunistic, really. I started off in new product development consulting. I played football with some guys that worked at Forrester, so I talked to them about maybe making a move, and they introduced me to some other people, and so I got a job there. And then when I was kind of getting a little tired of being an analyst at Forrester, I just so happened to have gotten a phone call from someone at SAP, kind of saying that they were looking for someone to fill this job, and so I hopped on that opportunity. So it's never really been kind of planned out in any strict sense of the word, but really just what seems to be the more interesting opportunity at this point in time, and what kind of fits to where my head is at that point in time.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. And we're definitely going to talk a little bit about networking and all the serendipitous ways that we find ourselves on these career paths. So thanks for giving a little preview of that. Colin, would you like to go next?
Yeah, the prior two speakers make me feel a bit like a slacker coming into college. I did not envision myself a New York Times bestseller or whatever, TJ. I was a bit of an open book. I was coming in actually as a track athlete. I had got recruited and entered into the College of General Studies, which I didn't quite understand what that was until I got here, but actually had a really great experience there. It was more of a kind of cohort model, kind of traveled with the same folks and had core classes, so you got your kind of prerequisites done. A lot of interesting conversations, but one of the benefits of being in the College of General Studies was kind of after that 2 years, you kind of got your pick of where you wanted to end up in schools or colleges. And I knew that communications was one of the harder colleges to get into. I did well at CGS. And so part of the advisory was like, if you feel like you might want to be in that industry, it's probably a good idea after your second year to push in there. You can always transfer out. So I did. I went down the public relations track. I thought, maybe I would want to be in business. At the same time, I had a minor concentration in sociology. So there was kind of this tug and pull against, not anti-corporate, but like, trying to find a deeper purpose into what I wanted to do with my life at that point. I started kind of traveling more and being more interested in my sociology classes than my communications classes, so to speak. I ended my 4 years, had my degree in public relations, and actually had a redshirt year on my track scholarship. So I had an extra year. And my girlfriend at the time, my better half today, my wife, kind of saw me struggling. And she was one of these people that knew exactly what she wanted to do. She wanted to be a teacher her whole life. She was in the school of education. And she said, maybe that's a road you might want to go down. There's communications pieces of that, but it's really you could really make a strong difference. Both kind of identity wise, but the frame of reference that I brought to the work. So I jumped into the school of the College of Education, got my grad degree there, moved into the profession of teaching. Stayed there for 10 years, became I would say a pretty good teacher in the Boston public schools. Along the way, got my doctorate, moved up the ranks into kind of upper administration until I was an assistant superintendent, and now kind of run my own consultancy. I've been in consulting for about 3 years. So again, it was not a straight and narrow path. But as I reflect, and I know we'll get into this a bit later, I do come back to a lot of the things that I learned in COM and how that's helped me along my journey in the different stops. So I'll stop there because I know we'll kind of dig into that later.
Awesome. Thanks, Colin. And we are going to talk about next a little bit about using your degree. So we're curious to hear a little bit about how your degree helped you with teaching. Kayla, do you want to answer the question next?
Yeah, so I did not know what I wanted to do. I started out with a psychology degree and didn't know what to do with that following undergrad. So I took a gap year and I worked at a cancer clinic, actually at Emory University in Georgia. And during that time, I realized that there is a huge communication problem within healthcare and very low health literacy. And so I wanted to focus on how can I communicate to different audiences in a way that they'll be able to grasp. And so that's when I decided to enroll at BU studying health communication. But even within that program, there's just so many types of communication that I wasn't aware of. You could go PR, journalism, visual communication if you want to do graphic design. There were just so many ways that you could go, and I didn't know which one I wanted. And so I think landing the internship with the National Cancer Institute really helped me to narrow that down a bit more. And I realized that I really did want to work with the web, and I really enjoyed visual communication. So following that, I landed my first job at a communications firm, which contracted with different government health institutions. And so my contract that I was placed on was the Office on Women's Health. And so I did a lot of work on both the womenshealth.gov and girlshealth.gov website and got tons of experience working with project managers, stakeholders, content strategists, and designers. And from there, I was able to see where I shined the most, where I felt like I fit best, and what I enjoyed the most. And I leaned more toward the design side. And so after leaving that job, I pursued a certificate in design, in UX design. And because of the experience I had previously with government and because of my background with communication and understanding audiences, which is something that I really learned at BU, I was able to land my current role. And now I'm working on the cdc.gov website as a UX designer. So it was kind of a long road. I would say it was the scenic route getting to this point, but I think every step mattered and I picked up something at each of those places.
Awesome, thanks so much. And I think both you, Colin, and Kayla, both of you sort of started answering the second question. So I'm going to go right to TJ and we'll start answering that, which is, how did you find a career that was off the beaten path? And then Kayla, you just spoke about this a little bit, but how is that degree still useful? So we'll start with TJ and go around again.
Well, I guess, how did I find it? I'm not sure I found it, more like it kind of found me, because I'm being completely serious when I say I stumbled into most of the jobs I have. Like it wasn't like I was actually, looking, for these particular sorts of career opportunities. It's just, I was in the right place at the right time, so to speak. But in terms of, how the degrees that I got from BU helped, I think first and foremost, any sort of communications degree, is going to give you a sense of how to tell a story. And a big part of, how you find opportunities are not like kind of specifically in the main of what it is that you got your degree in, is you have to be able to tell a story first and foremost about yourself and what it is that you can bring to the table. So, narrative shaping, being able to connect to different points, and then to, kind of reach conclusions are, have been a big part of, any sort of interview process that I've been in. But it's also been a big part of any job that I've been in, in terms of, consulting, or now what I'm doing in terms of, kind of having a market research function within a global software company. The entire, the entirety of the job, or the jobs that I've had, have really been about, how do you weave together stories, for people who have to make decisions that make it understandable why one point and another point are connected and what they should do about it. I think beyond that, a big part of any sort of communications degree is, being able to, not to be kind of glib about it, but to communicate, like to be able not just to tell the story, but to do so in a way that is like compelling and that, is understandable to the people that are in your audience. And so having an understanding of, who your audience is, what their motivations are, what level you need to speak to them at in order to kind of drive home your points, and then how to, piece together a presentation that is actually useful, for that individual, has been a kind of a big part of that, of my career progression. And then just like kind of the ability to be able to, speak in public. In my previous role, a lot of what I was doing was, giving presentations in conferences, keynoting conferences. It's in a room with 2,000-3,000 people, and being able to do that confidently, is a big part of that. Because if you can do it in a big setting, it doesn't necessarily translate easily to a small setting, but the same sorts of beats apply in terms of being able to tell a story, having presence, executive presence, or kind of large group presence, and then kind of being confident in that what it is that your story is and how you're going to tell that and convey it to the audience. So I think all of those things have been applicable every single day of my career since I left BU in the winter of 2004.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing that. And it's so funny, every time a panelist or anyone I speak to says that things happen serendipitously, I like to also remind students that it doesn't happen if you're just sitting in your dorm room the whole time. You know, you had to be playing football with your colleagues who introduced you to Forrester. And, you know, really just a shout out to all the students to not forget about the things that bring you joy on campus and joining student clubs, because a lot of the people that you meet could end up introducing you to future careers. Colin, do you want to talk a little bit, continue this conversation and talk a little bit about how your degree has been useful, and maybe touching a little bit upon the stakeholders that you probably had to work with in the education system with communications?
Yeah, kind of as I reflect back, not only kind of some of those hard skills you talk about around being able to present, being able to communicate in different forms, writing, thinking about kind of, you know, at what level do I need to hit this note at, but really thinking about stakeholders. And that skill in of itself to me, I think is unbelievably transferable. You know, I started my career out, my first job actually was at the Suffolk County House of Correction. I was teaching student inmates who were reading at either non-readers to 5th grade level. And I literally had to sell this idea that you would want to take my class in the cell blocks. And, you know, it was like 22, 23. So people would tell me to, you know, kindly or not so kindly, you know, leave them alone. But it was kind of selling that and the story of why you might want to take part of this. When I came into Boston Public Schools, I literally, sort of like TJ, I just took a day and I walked around schools in Roxbury. They had summer school open and I was just selling myself. I knew I wanted to be a public school teacher to folks who were in the building. And kind of running the programming, and that's how I got my first job. So I definitely wasn't in the dorm room. I was found in the streets, but the actual profession of teaching quite often really is, you know, selling your subject matter. I'm putting in front of a group of 25 middle schoolers and teaching math. And how do you connect that content to those students? You know, quite often we talk about culturally responsive practice. It really is deeply knowing your stakeholders. And then crafting a message and a product that they're going to like. You can try to force them to do it, but that's not as enjoyable or as effective as bringing them into the fold. So doing things like, if we needed to remediate a bit in math, bringing a group of boys who I knew were kind of hoopers and teaching them how to do fantasy basketball, right? And you can work on numeracy through those pieces. All the way up to being, you know, assistant superintendent and trying to make some systemic change in a very kind of balkanized city who have very different opinions around what they want their schools to look like, and trying to portray a message and get a campaign out there that can get enough consensus for us to push forward and progress. And some of the stuff that I talk to superintendents and school districts today when I'm consulting, you know, in this era of kind of culture wars and trying to get things done. I think those are all important. I wouldn't even call them soft skills, but transferable skills that I learned at COM and got to hone.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's interesting to hear also about all the different stakeholders you've worked with. Never thought about selling education to students. They're mandated to be there, but yeah, if they're going to pay attention, you got to sell it. Kayla, do you want to go next?
Sure. There's so much, but I'll just highlight 2 major things. So the first thing is the art of crafting a story and knowing what parts to tell, what parts not to tell, what parts to minimize, and what your audience is really after when they're reading your content. So with CDC, working on these very complex topics like COVID or any other national or global crises, there are so many pieces and so many components to it. And it's, you know, it affected everyone differently. And so how do we craft these web pages so that people are getting what they need from this website, that they're not having to spend hours getting information, that they're not feeling confused or frustrated or even frightened after going to our website, things like that. So how do we craft a story in a way that it is the most helpful? And so that is one thing I definitely learned at BU is floating the important things to the top, maybe the more specific details to the bottom. Who are we talking to? And making sure that the content is crafted in a way that is going to be helpful for who's reading the content. So that goes into my next point of empathy. Knowing your audience. That was something that was really drilled into me heavily during my program. And it goes beyond just, you know, is it male, female? Are there disabilities that we need to be thinking about? Is this going to be 508 compliant? How do I make sure that I am accounting for different reading levels? What about languages? What about, you know, just different things that are going to be important to different groups of people, and paying attention to the analytics and saying, okay, who's coming to this page, and, you know, are people dropping off? Why are they dropping off? And really just doing a deep dive into the person. And I think whenever someone is reading content or consuming anything, they want to feel seen, they want to feel included, and that whatever it is they're reading is for them. And so I would say just understanding that is going to make your content better. Yes, everyone wants the polished, beautiful designs and web pages and things like that. But at the end of the day, if it's not helpful, if they're confused, if they're lost, if it's complicated, no one's going to use it, and it's not going to be successful anyway. So really just understanding who I'm talking to and how I can best meet their needs.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Alison, moving it over to you.
Yeah, I can speak to the first part of the question about finding a career that was off the beaten path. You know, I think on the surface, it doesn't really seem like my job now is too much of a deviation from kind of what I studied, just because it still can be broadly bucketed under like marketing and communications. But it was, you know, my journey has certainly been unexpected and definitely unplanned for me. And I think a lot of that was fueled by a few factors, one being obviously just like economic changes. You know, when I was an undergrad, the 2007 to 2009 recession was like a big thing on everyone's mind, and the job market was kind of slowly slowing down as I was kind of graduating. And so just having a hard time finding jobs in PR was one of the biggest factors. But then I think a second component of following a career off your original path is just being able to lean into that experience through a process of self-discovery. And so like Kayla mentioned earlier, something that resonated with me was that she found ways or areas where she shined the most. And I think that's something that I found as well too. You know, I think as you continue to work and gain new professional experiences, you get a better awareness of what your strengths are and even what your personality is like in a workplace. And, you know, I think PR was definitely something I was interested in, but my skill sets kind of lend themselves a lot more to organization and project management. And that's kind of how I've been able to pursue down this path of creative production. And realizing too, like my personal prioritization and what I enjoy too in a career. I think overall it was more important to me to continue pursuing just the entertainment industry. So it became less of a focus and a search for PR specific jobs in any industry. And then I shifted my mindset to, well, what's in entertainment and what are the kind of ancillary roles around communications that I can kind of pursue. And, you know, talking a lot to people in the industry helped open my eyes to different roles and responsibilities. And my career just followed a natural evolution from job to job. You know, I'd work at one agency, which would have a contact at another company, and they would introduce me to that line of work, and it would kind of leapfrog from there. But overall, I think having such a broad educational base within COM was still very useful. You know, my line of work doesn't really require any specific degrees or certifications. So, you know, my education was still applicable. And like everyone mentioned, there's a lot of the soft skills that we learn in COM, you know, knowing your audience and being able to apply that to your role in your future career, whether or not the audience is your client at an entertainment studio or in healthcare or students. And so that's kind of what I've carried with me along the journey. And I think I just kind of envisioned, you know, a person's career path as not like a very straight, structured ladder where you're just going up one ring that's, stacked above the other. I think I kind of picture like a rock wall where you might be grabbing onto a notch that's, a little bit more lateral, but in the end, you're still kind of progressing up to a higher vantage point.
Awesome, thank you. So we're kind of going to build upon this a little bit more. It's something the panelists and I spoke a little bit about beforehand, of really just how your comm degree made you more competitive in the job you've had. You guys have talked about it a little bit, but specifically, I think something students ask a lot is, how do you sell those skills as relevant? And I think, Colin, you really talked about how a lot of what you did was sales, even within education. So we can start off with you, and if you could tell a little bit about how you sell your skills as relevant, and also if you want to speak to this of if there was transferable skills that helped you to do the job better.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely transferable skills that I had talked about around how I think it relates to teaching, learning, leadership. Again, trying to move different stakeholders to a common goal is a difficult thing, again, in spaces where not everybody has the same philosophy, but as you said, are kind of forced to fit into that system. So those are some of the things. How I sold my skills, a lot of times it was more organic. It wasn't me walking and saying I had this degree from Boston University. Like, people didn't care necessarily. And I work, in an industry where, you need certain certifications. Those are kind of the roadblocks. But once you're in there, it's more around kind of the relationships that you can build. And then, hopefully, everything's not a meritocracy, but the better that you do your job, the more you get recognized. The more people see you as a leader for kind of whatever kind of level you're at as a teacher, and then your potential as a leader of adults, and then a leader of systems. So, it more manifested in a lot of things I talked about before of being able to allow me to do my job as an educator a lot better, allowed me to do some kind of more difficult things, society, district-wide, when we talked about Boston, and move initiatives that were very, very difficult, by being able to examine and think strategically around what messaging, what strategies I would need to use in this section of the city versus this section of the city, and from this stakeholder to that stakeholder. So very similar to the answer I gave before, but it wasn't hey, you have a comm degree, we got to get you for this. And certainly my first job, they couldn't care less in the County House of Correction. I didn't say anything about my education there.
Yeah, you brought it there anyway without having to specifically say.
Yeah, they want to know you care. They don't really care what credentials you have.
Awesome. Kayla, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
Sure. So I would say, again, the empathy piece. I'll actually let you in on one of my interview questions for my current job. So one question was, how do you handle, like a difficult situation with a coworker? Say if you're working with a developer and you're not seeing eye to eye, how would you handle that? And my answer to that question is, well, I consider them an audience as well. So if you understand that audience, if you understand how a developer thinks and what they care about, what their goals are, and you can meet them there, it's going to better your communication. So communication isn't just for the external audience, it's also for your team internally. And it helps you tremendously with cross-team collaboration. And no one wants to work with difficult people. So especially when you have to work so closely on something like a web project or an app or whatever it is, you're constantly touching base all day long. And so you want to make sure that you are good at communicating. You're good at reaching a common ground and getting to your goal, right? Especially in the time that you have allotted to get it done, because we have tons of deadlines. And so I would definitely say that gave me an edge, is knowing how to communicate with different audiences effectively. And then the other thing is knowing how to create content for different mediums, because again, I have to work on not only web pages, but I have to work on the back end. I also have to communicate with stakeholders. I have to communicate with the people who are coming in from the White House requesting things. And so how do I share all this content on different platforms to the right people and communicate it effectively. And having that background from BU, where I had to do so many different courses and learn how to write and communicate, really gave me an edge.
Awesome, thanks. Alison, turning it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely more than just having the diploma. I think a lot about kind of the projects that I worked on as a student. And I think the projects where I had to work collaboratively with a team were especially helpful in entering the workforce, because you're naturally going to have to work with others and kind of motivate everyone towards a common goal. And so that was really helpful in shaping me for those types of environments, even assignments where I could exercise creativity, whether that's in writing or other projects like creating a blog. Like those were all things that I kind of remember as being memorable in my experience. But I would also add that just being at BU and being in Boston, I feel like I benefited a lot from just being in the city. There's a lot of opportunities outside of the classroom. I was also doing an internship at Allied Integrated Marketing, which was nearby, and that gave me some more communications experience. I was working retail on Newbury Street for a little while, which gave me, the hard sales skills and customer service, and being able to kind of live in both those worlds at that point in my life was really valuable.
Awesome, thank you. TJ, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, I mean, I guess at the core of your question, when you're asking about selling, I think the thing for everyone to remember is that you only have to sell what you did in college once. And that's like when you start your career. Every other job you go for after that, you're selling what you did after college. So when it comes to, like, I guess, trying to transfer what you learned at BU into a job that does not necessarily kind of hold the same sort of title as your degree, it's again about making connection points between what's in the job description and what it is that you're going to be asked to do. So my first job in consulting, it was an analytics job. It was like, can you put together or can you analyze data, and can you demonstrate an ability to tell stories around that. And so that kind of lined up with what I was doing at BU in my master's program, but it also kind of lined up with what I had learned beforehand in terms of writing presentation skills and things of that nature. Everything after that is just additive, so leading teams, that's a communications skill, but it's also a leadership skill. You don't necessarily learn the leadership part of it at BU, but you learn the communications part of it at BU, and so you just add those things together. Standing before executives and presenting kind of findings. That's not something that you learn at BU per se, but the presentation part of it you add with the executive presence part of it. So this is it's a constant evolution of what it is that you learned as a foundation, which is what all BU is giving you is just a foundation, and you take that and you add to it based on the experiences that you have and the people that you run into and things of that nature.
Awesome, thanks so much. And I love that perspective. I think a lot of times students think it's all about your GPA, but a lot of the GPA goes out the window once you get your first job. So shifting gears a little bit, because we do have some questions in the chat that I will get to after I ask this next question. Wanted to just briefly touch about networking. Many of you have kind of danced around this subject. So I wanted to know how your unique identity might have shown up in the workforce. And regarding networking, are there people or mentors that people that you've networked with that you found have helped you navigate that? And we'll start with Kayla.
I would say networking definitely landed me my first role after graduating from BU. I actually met with one of the previous interns from the program that I was interning, and she told me about her job and how she landed this job at a communications firm, and she was telling me about it. And after having a conversation with her, I applied and used her as a reference, and I ended up landing the position. And then from there, I had no idea about UX. And so while I was at that job, a content strategist who was very well versed in UX, took me under her wing. She taught me a lot, gave me a lot of resources. I was able to see her work and whiteboard and work with designers and things like that. And that's where I got my first, that was basically my foundation of knowledge as it pertained to user experience. And so I took that with me when I started my bootcamp, and then eventually landed the position I have now.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. I'm trying to think of, I think Alison, you're next, if we're going in order in my screen. Do you want
Sure. Yeah, so I had landed that first internship at Disney through a connection, a family friend. I'm Japanese American, grew up in the Christian community, and that person was pretty influential in bringing me into her team at Disney, and that she was really the only person I had known at the time that even worked in entertainment. I didn't know a lot of people that were in the industry, but she kind of made that first introduction. And since then, I've been kind of enjoying following that career path. But I think when I look at my own personality and kind of how I network, I'm a natural introvert. And so I've tried a lot of the big networking events where you just go in cold and you try to mingle with strangers. And that's been tough for me. And so I think the most effective method for me has been just one-on-one interviews, not necessarily tied to actual job interviews, but just informational interviews where any of my current network or coworkers can help introduce me to other people that can share a glimpse into their world or their professional career. And so I've really leaned heavily on those. And then obviously, like when you're first entering the workforce, a lot of your connections are kind of limited to maybe like your peers from school or people, adults your parents introduce you to. But, as you mature in your profession, you start to develop your own network through each job experience, and it becomes a lot more fruitful too to kind of tap into those people. And I've been in a unique situation where each of my jobs has kind of made the introduction to the next job. So when I was at Disney, out of graduation, I only was able to have like a contract job, which was fixed 5 or 6 months. And then I knew I needed to move on and find another role. While I was there, they worked with a creative agency who was always on our sets, kind of directing the photo shoots and helping design the key art for a lot of their shows. And so I was introduced to them through that Disney relationship. The agency was called BLT, and that's where I kind of began my journey into creative production for the print advertising world. And then Disney has kind of been a through line, but not necessarily working for Disney, but for working for all of the companies that kind of supported their marketing ecosystem. So after I finished my role at the creative agency, I then found my introduction to Disney's media agency and was able to kind of tap into that experience and see the marketing process from a different perspective, where I was a little bit closer to how they were strategizing their buys, and then also just being a little bit closer to the execution of those campaigns. And that's kind of like how I've been able to, I guess, keep that thread going and just embracing kind of where others kind of naturally guide me. I'm not too set on like determining an end goal and then figuring out how to get there. I kind of try to go with the flow and take advantage of opportunities as they come.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, and it's interesting. It looks like a few of you have had one job that led to the other, and I think this is the perfect segue into TJ, who's next, to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, on the networking front, I try to abide by 2 pieces of advice I got years and years ago. One was from my mother. She said, never throw people away. Yeah. So everybody that you meet, you collect them. And then the other was from a guy that was working with me on an internship I did in Washington, D.C. He said, make it so that they never want you to leave. And so I've kind of abided by, both of those pieces of advice. Like every person I've worked with, every person I've met, like has been, someone to add to the Rolodex. And I've always tried to, make sure that regardless of the job, and kind of the responsibilities and what I felt about the task or whatever, that you're always trying to do, the best job possible so that, that you're a memorable person to that individual, and they feel confident in, pushing your case forward. So that, to this day, I've got, people who are clients of mine, for example, who I can call to provide references. It's, when I joined SAP, for example, I called a couple of my clients to, kind of give me a reference for working here. When I started at my previous company, Forrester, I called 2 BU professors to provide me a reference, as well as, a former BU professor who was working there at the time to provide a reference. So, it's always been one of those things where, people, you meet a bunch of people in your life, going in different directions, who are doing interesting things, who are, having interesting experiences, and you can kind of keep them, in the network, kind of keep the, kind of keep staying in touch with them, stay engaged with them. They can show you different things, show you different opportunities. And if you've left a good enough impression upon them, then they're going to be at least more willing than not, to invite you into those opportunities.
Fantastic. Colin, you want to go next?
Sure. Kind of similar to what folks have said and connected to TJ. One is around, I see networking more around like relationship building. There's been folks kind of along my path who I've watched, observed, but also have kind of reached out and saw that, I worked hard, that I was competent, and they wanted to afford me some opportunities. So I think that point that TJ made around, doing the best doing the best you can at what you're doing and working really hard at it, I think is the most important thing, because you don't want to just be chasing things and not be prepared when it's time for you to move up. And then second, that might have been said or not, is kind of around risk taking, like, so when, or doing above and beyond, so when folks ask me to be on this committee, when folks ask me to make a presentation in front of those thousands of people, around something that, especially the work products that you've worked hard on, being willing and able to step up to those things will open doors that you didn't know that were even there. So I think that humility, building those authentic relationships, working really hard at whatever you're focused on, and then just being willing to be a bit vulnerable and if you worked hard, letting folks see the work that you've done has helped me along the way.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. We have more questions, but now that I'm just being cognizant of time, there was a few questions that came in through the chat. Also, Alison just posted in the webinar chat a guide for networking. If anyone needs help on how to go about networking, how to ask, Alison talked a little bit about the informational interviews she did. Many introverts, and myself, I'm an extrovert who tends to be pretty shy, tend to do these informational meetings, which are just one-on-one meetings. And then also I just sent in the chat, I believe it's the chat, a link to our website, the Career Services website, with career guides for everything, including LinkedIn as well. We're going to move to one of the questions that Gabby Gomez asked in the chat. Gabby asked, how did you guys handle career setbacks, if any? And then we will, since this is more informal, this part, anyone who wants to share, you can take yourself off of mute first and share if that's a question that you want to answer.
I mean, I think it's like anything else. You take it as, you can embrace it as a learning experience, or you can wallow in it. And I think, the approach that I've always tried to take to anything is that, well, that's something new. So, you learn from it, and then, kind of move forward. I mean, but I recognize that that's a mindset that not everyone has. And so it's a mindset that, especially in the corporate world, especially right now, that you kind of have to embrace, where it's just, these are not personal things, although they affect you personally. And if you take it in the spirit of, this is not indicative of who I am, as a person, this is just something that has happened at this point in time, then you can embrace it as an opportunity to draw some sort of lesson about what it is that you will or won't do. I mean, there have been plenty of times where I'm like, yeah, that sucked. So I'm not going to do that again. or I'm going to try to, avoid that situation or try to, kind of create the conditions for myself in which, I've fortified, my position against that sort of thing happening again, and just kind of keep moving forward.
I can answer that as well. So after my initial job, after graduating at the communications firm, after leaving that job, I relocated back to Georgia thinking I was just going to pick up work immediately. And it actually took me about 1.5 years to find my next role. And that was really tough because I started to feel very inadequate. And I think what really helped me was that I didn't just sit around feeling bad or, feeling discouraged. I continued to learn. I continued to empower myself through learning and growing my skills continuously. And so I treated my studying as a full-time job. Every day I would be up in the mornings and, studying and practicing and working on projects, even though I wasn't getting paid. I was still working on projects and continuing to sharpen my skills until one day I was met with the opportunity to share my work. And it would have been really sad if I didn't have any work to share because I wasn't getting paid for it. So I think just empowering yourself through continuing to learn and grow, even if you don't necessarily have the opportunities that you would want at that time, eventually the opportunities will come.
Yeah, I think I can add that I don't necessarily recommend it, but I have actually parted ways with 2 of my jobs without knowing what I would do next. And that was primarily just because when I'm working, especially on the agency side, it's pretty demanding, and I focus a lot of my attention to my job. And so sometimes I find it hard to kind of split the time between my current job and devoting ample time to job search and interview. And so I had kind of talked to my managers both those times and just gave them, really long leads, like 2-3 months, letting them know I was going to leave the company and kind of explore my next point in my career. And the last time I did that before Netflix was in March of 2020, right when the pandemic started. And so that I also had 1 year off in between jobs. And what helped keep me sane and positive was just staying busy. So constantly applying to jobs, having like a schedule for when to check websites and see if there's new postings, and then getting like a side kind of hobby in, I found an organization called Hunger Action Los Angeles, and it allowed me to kind of exercise some time towards volunteer work, contributing to programs that helped supply funding for low-income households at farmers markets so that money could be spent towards, nutritious food and kind of give more access to those types of produce. But that was definitely something that I embraced in the end, and is an experience that I'm super grateful for. You also in your career don't always get a lot of time or breathing room in between jobs, especially if you are doing the traditional route of actually getting a new job before you leave your old job. So yeah, just appreciate those moments too, where you can kind of reset and rethink about your career.
Awesome. Thank you all for your input. Given that we have about 6 minutes left, I think it would be nice for everyone, all the panelists, to just kind of share a little bit. We talked about this before about, what you wish you knew when you started on your career path. That's really the key of what this panel is about things off the beaten path. So if everyone can just share a bit of advice on what they wish they knew. Alison, we'll start with you because it's your turn next, and we'll go from there.
Sure. I would just say, continue to practice persistence and patience. I originally applied for a job at Netflix in 2014, and it wasn't until 7 years later that I actually did get offered a job. So you can't always control the timing of when these opportunities open up, but what you can control is kind of how prepared you are for taking advantage of those opportunities. And just, something that I've really enjoyed too, as I've matured in my career, is just the natural building of your confidence as you gain more experience in your profession, in your craft, and you build up an expertise. I think when you're a student, it may be pretty intimidating to see someone who's at the peak of their career and wonder, how do I get from point A to point B? But I think that accumulates over time and through every interaction you have and every job you take on.
Thanks so much. TJ, would you like to go next?
Sure. Take more risk. I'm a risk averse person. That's just kind of like by nature, but you have more room to fail early in life than you do later. Like I'm actually more risk tolerant now than I was when I was in my 20s. And I kind of wish I wish it was reversed. Like I wish I had been more risk tolerant then than I am now. But that is kind of what it is. But I'd say like that's where you learn, that's where you grow, that's where you explore. Like when you take a leap and maybe you fall, maybe you don't, but you grow from those experiences. And I think that if you can embrace that, if you can kind of tolerate that, then I think you'll have a richer experience.
Great advice. Think about my mortgage now, and I couldn't agree with you more. I'm a little more risk averse now. Colin, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I get other than kind of knowing the Powerball numbers. I think the long-term mindset, I think kind of dovetails with what TJ was talking about, like understanding like this is a journey, and to have patience with it, and not feel not put so much pressure. There's times when you're young, you put a lot of pressure on yourself and you think like, the world is going to end if I don't do this, or, if I miss this opportunity. But really, taking that time to soak in as much as you can when you're young, especially from like elders that have done it for a long time, and be able to be in the space to take that wisdom, and grow with it. So, I think being able to do that then allows you to take more risks, allows you to see that you're going to have many more kind of bites at the apple, so to speak. So being open, taking a long-term kind of approach to your own personal development, your professional development. I think, you'll see there's more doors than if you're really hyper-focused and impatient, especially as TJ said, at an early age. So that's what that would be my vote.
Yeah, thanks. It also kind of touches on what Alison was saying before about this long-term plan and not necessarily starting at not necessarily ending up at Netflix right away. So thanks so much for touching on that. Kayla.
I wish I knew that the role that I thought I wanted may not be the role that I actually want once I get into it. And that once you realize that it's okay to pivot. You don't have to stay there, but know that all of the pieces up until that point matter and they build upon each other. So you are still like, no experience is lost. You are still going to be able to use those things that you picked up along the way, wherever you go next. And so that's what I did. I ended up in a career where I thought I wanted it, but I realized there's actually something I enjoy more, and that's okay.
Awesome. And that's such a great way to wrap up the panel. Thank you so much for saying that, Kayla. Yeah, we talked a lot in this panel about all those transferable skills and all the ways that the lessons that you guys learned along the way brought you, and your comm degree brought you to where you are today. So thank you all so much for your empathy and your honesty as you shared your career experiences. I know the students really appreciate hearing from people who have graduated. So we really appreciate your time. So thank you guys again so much for sharing your time and giving back to the student community and the alumni community. We're so grateful to have spoken to you today, and have a great day, everyone.